The shield wall fractured with a sound like planetary ice breaking. Through the widening cracks, something massive pushed into reality. Too many angles, too many surfaces, geometry that shouldn't exist. The Kael'thron evacuation station shuddered. 300 species screamed in 40 different atmospheres. Security Chief Vexra's primary heart stopped. She'd seen extinction events before. This was worse. The dimensional breach pulsed with colors her species hadn't evolved to process, and her neural implant was already overheating, trying to translate the impossible into something her consciousness could survive. "All Royal Guard to Throne Chamber 7, she transmitted, forcing her voice steady. "Category Omega?" Civilian protocols enacted. Around her, the evacuation became chaos. A Mytharian family of 17 tried to squeeze through a ventilation shaft. 2 Clix hatchlings clung to a support beam, their parents already crushed in the stampede. The dimensional wound grew wider, something that might have been a mouth opened inside it. Vexra grabbed the hatchlings with her lower arms, passed them to a passing medic. Her upper arms never left her pulse rifle. Training held when biology wanted to run. She'd sworn the oath of stillness 30 cycles ago. Today she'd live it or die by it. The entity pushed further through. The station's artificial gravity inverted for 3 seconds. Bodies floated, then slammed back down. Throne Chamber 7 was supposed to be impenetrable. 5-meter-thick alloy walls. Gravitational dampers. A security system that could detect hostile intent before thoughtfully formed. Vexa sprinted through corridors that bent in directions they hadn't bent before, following muscle memory when the floor stopped being reliable. She burst through the final barrier to find Queen Talisandra standing perfectly still before the primary viewport. The Queen's crown spines were fully extended, the only sign of alarm in her otherwise composed posture. Behind her, the entity had grown large enough to eclipse 3 of the station's 4 suns. "Your Majesty." Vexra's voice came out ragged despite her best efforts. "We must evacuate you immediately." No. Talisandra didn't turn. Her reflection in the viewport showed eyes that had witnessed the fall of civilizations. "Look." Vexavra looked. The entity was singing. No, not singing. It was vibrating at frequencies that rewrote quantum states. Ships trying to escape weren't exploding. They were ceasing to have ever existed. The station's chroniclers were screaming that their historical records were changing, events unwriting themselves. "We have 47 seconds before the throne chamber shielding fails," Vexra reported. "Then we have approximately 8 seconds before." A small human child walked into the throne chamber. Vexra's weapon came up instantly. Her targeting reticle painted the child's forehead. Her finger rested on the trigger. The child couldn't have been more than 7 solar cycles old. Pale skin. Brown hair and 2 braids, wearing what appeared to be a sleeping garment decorated with images of small Earth creatures, barefoot, carrying a stuffed animal that looked like a simplified Earth feline. "How," Vexra said softly, "did you bypass 17 security checkpoints?" The child blinked at her. The doors were open. Every door between here and the civilian quarters required either royal clearance or Vexra's personal biometrics. The child should not exist in this space. The child could not exist in this space. And yet, Talisandra turned for the first time. Her crown spines lowered slightly. "What is your designation, small one, Mia?" The child looked at the viewport, at the entity that was unmaking reality. "Is that the bad thing everyone's screaming about?" "Yes," Talisandra said simply. Mia walked forward. Vexra tracked her with the rifle, uncertain whether to stop her. The child pressed her palm against the viewport. On the other side, separated by 10 centimeters of transparent alloy in the fabric of space-time itself, the entity's knot mouth gaped wider. "It's scared," Mia said. Vex's translator hiccuped. "Your device is malfunctioning, Chief." The human appeared to suggest the apocalypse entity is experiencing fear. "Translation is accurate," her AI confirmed. "It doesn't belong here," Mia continued, apparently unconcerned that she was addressing an alien queen and an armed security chief while reality dissolved outside. "It got lost. And now everyone's screaming at it and it doesn't know how to get home." The entity convulsed. Another ship vanished from history. Vexra's implant registered that her own graduation from the academy might have just been erased. She still remembered it, but the physical records were gone. Talisandra knelt beside the child. "You understand it?" "Not really." Mia tilted her head. "But my mommy says when something's scary and loud, it's usually scared too." Vexra's communication implant crackled. Chief structural integrity at 14%. Mass evacuation failing. We have. Static consumed the rest. Mia turned from the viewport to look directly at Queen Talisandra. Can I try something? Mommy taught me. Vexra's weapon stayed trained. Her every instinct screamed this was wrong. Humans were unpredictable. Human children doubly so. Protocol demanded she remove the civilian from the throne chamber, but Protocol hadn't stopped the dimensional breach. Protocol hadn't prevented the entity from erasing 3,000 souls from existence. Protocol was burning along with the rest of reality. Talisandra met Vexra's eyes. An entire conversation passed in that glance. What did your mother teach you? The Queen asked quietly. Mia smiled. It was a kind of smile children gave when asked to share a favorite game. She taught me karaoke. The entity screamed in frequencies that turned two of Vexra's sensory organs into decorative holes. The station listed 45 degrees. Gravity failed completely this time, and in the silence between heartbeats suspended in zero gravity, Vexra watched a human child begin to sing. The song made no sense. Something about twinkling stars and wondering what they were. Simple words, simpler melody, the kind of thing every human child apparently learned. Nothing that should affect a creature capable of erasing cause and effect.
The entity stopped screaming. Its not mouth closed.
Or opened differently. Vexra couldn't tell. Her visual cortex was filing 17 different incident reports. Mia sang. The station steadied. Gravity returned with a gentleness that suggested intention rather than mechanical restoration. And the entity began to change. The dimensional breach wasn't closing. It was transforming. The wrongness of its angles started to resolve into patterns. Still impossible, but impossible in a way that felt curious rather than hostile. Mia reached the second verse. Something about heightened diamonds in the sky. The entity reached back, not through the viewport, through something else. Through the space between spaces. Appendage that existed in more dimensions than Vexra could process extended toward the throne chamber. Toward the child. Vexra's finger tightened on the trigger. Every combat protocol she'd ever learned demanded she fire. Eliminate the threat.
Protect the Queen.
Protect reality itself. Talisandra's hand covered Vexra's weapon, pressing it gently toward the floor. Wait, the Queen whispered. The appendage touched the viewport where Mia's palm still rested. The child finished her song. In the resulting silence, she looked up at the thing that had nearly ended existence, and with the absolute confidence of someone who had never learned that some things were impossible, she lifted her other hand and booped the apocalypse on what might have been its nose. The entity froze. Every scientist on the 17 worlds would spend the next decade arguing about what happened in the next microsecond. Vexra would replay her helmet footage 10,000 times and still not understand. The breach shimmered, contracted. The entity pulled back, not in retreat, but with the deliberate care of someone trying not to break something fragile. Then it made a sound. Vexra's translator offered 17 possible interpretations. Confusion, surprise, amusement, recognition query. Mia booped it again. The entity responded. Its not face reconfigured, something that might have been eyes appeared. Blinked. The appendage withdrew slightly, then returned, tapping the viewport once. It wants to play, Mia explained to the two stunned aliens behind her. Like tag. Sort of. She booped the viewport a third time. The entity responded faster now, tapping back. A rhythm formed. The child laughed. The entity's vibration shifted to match the frequency of her laughter. Not perfectly, but close enough that Vexra's audio implant registered it as harmonics. The dimensional breach began to close. Not violently, carefully, like someone closing a door they'd accidentally opened. Reality stabilized. Ships that had been erased flickered back into existence. Vexra's graduation records restored themselves. The station's chroniclers confirmed that causality had resumed normal function. The entity lingered at the edge of the closing breach. Its appendage remained pressed against the viewport, matched to Mia's small hand. For a moment that stretched into eternity, a human child and an incomprehensible cosmic being existed in perfect, impossible communion. Then Mia waved goodbye. The entity's appendage performed a motion that might have been a wave, might have been a blessing, might have been a promise to remember. The breach sealed, the entity vanished. The universe continued existing. Mia turned around, clutching her stuffed feline. Can I go back to bed now? I'm sleepy. Vexra's weapon clattered to the floor. Her hands were shaking. All four of them. Talissandra stared at the child for a long moment. Then, with the grace of someone who had ruled for 3 centuries, the queen of the Kael'thran Empire knelt until she was eye level with the 7-year-old human in pajamas. "Yes," Talissandra said softly, "but first, would you teach me that song?" That's the important part. And in Throne Chamber 7, while emergency crews struggled to comprehend what had just not happened, while 300 species processed their continued existence, while the universe slowly remembered how to follow its own rules, a queen learned to twinkle her fingers like stars from a child who had booped the apocalypse into submission with nothing but a nursery rhyme and the absolute certainty that everything deserved a chance to make a friend. Vexra picked up her weapon with trembling hands. She would need to file a report. She had no idea what words to use. Her communicator crackled. "Chief, status report? We're reading normal. All systems returning to baseline. The breach is... Chief, what happened up there?" Vexra looked at the queen teaching a hand dance to a sleepy child. She looked at the viewport that had, moments ago, framed the end of everything. She looked at her own hands, still shaking, still alive. "A miracle," she finally answered. "We just witnessed a miracle." But that wasn't quite right. Miracles were divine intervention, acts of gods, cosmic coincidence. This had been something else entirely. This had been a child who saw fear behind the terror, who responded to cosmic horror with compassion instead of violence, who treated an apocalypse entity with the same friendly confidence she'd probably shown to every new student in her school. This had been human. The communicator crackled again, demanding details, demanding reports, demanding explanations. Vexra silenced it. Some things couldn't be reduced to incident reports. Some things couldn't be filed in triplicate and stored in databases. Some things you just had to witness and carry with you forever. In the viewport's reflection, she watched Mia yawn, her small hands still glowing with whatever impossible contact she'd made. The child's eyes were already closing. The stuffed feline dangled from her other hand. "Chief," Talissandra's voice cut through her thoughts, "please escort our guest back to her family." "And Vexra?" "Yes, Your Majesty? Make note in your personal log. Today we learned that humanity's greatest weapon isn't their adaptability, their technology, or their stubbornness." Talissandra's crown spines settled into an expression Vexra had never seen before. Peace, wonder, hope. It's their absolute refusal to accept that anything is beyond redemption, even the apocalypse. Vexra lifted Mia gently into her arms. The child mumbled something about stars and diamonds and her mommy making good pancakes, already half asleep. "Come, small one," Vexra whispered. "Let's take you home." As she carried the child through corridors that had stopped trying to unmake themselves, past species that had ceased screaming, through a station that had remembered how to exist, Vexra made a decision. She would never file an official report about this incident. Some truths were too important to be buried in bureaucracy. Instead, she would tell this story. She would tell it to every recruit who joined the Royal Guard. She would tell it to her own offspring when they were old enough to understand. She would tell it until her dying breath and beyond, if she could manage it. She would tell them about the day humanity saved the universe, not with weapons or warfare, but with a child's song and the simple, devastating wisdom that sometimes the scariest things just need someone brave enough to say hello. Mia's mother met them at the civilian quarters, frantic and terrified. "Oh, thank God, Mia." "Baby, where were you?" "I made a friend, Mommy." Mia's eyes opened briefly. "A really big friend. And I sang the star song like you taught me." That's nice, honey." Her mother pulled her close, clearly not understanding. "Let's get you back to bed." Vexra started to turn away. "Wait." The mother looked up at her. Human eyes, so different from Kael'thran sensory organs, but carrying the same desperate relief every parent wore after nearly losing their child. "Thank you for bringing her back safe. I don't know what happened, but thank you." "No," Vexra said quietly. "Thank you for teaching her that song, for teaching her to see fear instead of threat, for teaching her..." She paused, searching for words. "For teaching her to be human." The mother looked confused. Vexra didn't elaborate. She simply placed one hand over her primary heart in the Kael'thran gesture of deepest respect, then returned to her post. The station's damage control teams were reporting impossible findings. Systems that had failed were now functioning better than before. Hull breaches had sealed themselves. The dimensional breach had left no trace of its existence except in the memories of those who'd witnessed it. And in the station's acoustic sensors, which had recorded every moment of Mia's song and the entity's response, the science teams would spend years analyzing those recordings. They would discover patterns in the entity's vibrations that matched not just Mia's voice, but human neural frequencies. wavelengths of curiosity, loneliness, hope. They would theorize that the entity had been drawn to the evacuation station not as prey, but as a beacon, that it had been seeking connection in the only way it knew how, that its dimensional breakthrough had been an attempt at communication that humanity's collective fear had misinterpreted as an attack. They would write papers, hold symposiums, debate the implications. But they would all agree on one conclusion. Humanity possessed an unprecedented ability to find commonality with the truly alien, to bridge gaps that shouldn't be bridgeable, to make friends with the apocalypse. Vexra returned to Throne Chamber 7 to find Talissandra still standing at the viewport, staring at the space where the entity had been. "It wanted to learn our song," the Queen said without turning. "That's what it was trying to do. All that destruction, all that terror, it was attempting to match our frequencies, to harmonize. It didn't understand it was killing us. And now it knows," Vexra replied. "Because a child taught it. A human child." Talissandra finally turned. "Security Chief, I'm about to make a decision that will alter our civilization's trajectory. I want you to bear witness." Vexra straightened. "I serve at your command, Your Majesty. I'm issuing a royal decree. Effective immediately, all Kael'thran diplomatic teams will include human cultural liaisons, not as consultants, as equals, as essential members." Talisandra's crown spines extended fully, the posture of absolute conviction. Because today we learned that when facing the unknown, the incomprehensible, the impossible, humanity's first instinct isn't to attack or flee, it's to sing. It's to reach out. It's to boop the damn thing on the nose and see if it wants to play. Despite everything, Vexra felt her mandibles curl into what humans called a smile. That is perhaps the most terrifying and wonderful truth I've ever heard. Quite. Talissandra walked to her throne, settling into it with the weight of someone who'd just added a new responsibility to an already impossible burden. Terrifying and wonderful, much like humanity itself. The Queen activated her official communication channel. "Attention all evacuees. This is Queen Talissandra. The crisis is past. You are safe. And you have a human child named Mia to thank for your continued existence. Remember her name. Remember this day. Remember that salvation can come from the smallest, most unexpected sources." She paused. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that Vexra would remember for the rest of her long life. "Remember that the universe is vast and strange, filled with wonders and terrors beyond our comprehension. But it is also filled with opportunities for connection, for understanding, for friendship, if we're brave enough to reach out instead of pull back, if we're willing to sing instead of scream, if we dare to see the fear behind the frightening." Another pause. Outside the viewport, ships began returning to their normal trajectories. The station's systems hummed back to life. 300 species started breathing again. "Today we didn't just survive," Talissandra continued. "We learned. And what we learned is this. Humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy isn't their technology or their tenacity. It's their unshakable belief that anyone, anything, can be reached, can be understood, can be befriended." She deactivated the channel, looked at Vexra. "Do you think I'm making a mistake? Tying our civilization's future to a species we've only known for 17 cycles?" Vexra thought about a child in pajamas booping the apocalypse, about a simple song stopping the end of everything, about the absolute certainty in Mia's eyes that the terrifying entity just needed a friend. "No, Your Majesty," she said firmly. "I think you're making the only logical choice. Humanity just demonstrated a capability no other species has shown. They can weaponize compassion. They can turn friendship into a defense mechanism. They can teach the apocalypse how to play tag." Weaponize compassion. Talissandra tested the phrase. I like that. Though I suspect humans would argue that compassion shouldn't be a weapon, perhaps that's exactly why it works. The Queen laughed. It was a sound Vexra had heard perhaps twice in 30 cycles of service. "You're becoming philosophical in your old age, Chief." "I'm becoming human, apparently." Vexra checked her weapon, her hands finally steady. "It seems to be contagious." In the civilian quarters, Mia slept. She dreamed of stars and singing, and a friend who lived between dimensions and sometimes got lost trying to say hello. In her dream, the entity found its way home. In her dream, she visited it there, in whatever impossible space it called home, and they sang together in frequencies that rewrote reality in gentler ways. In her dream, she taught it other songs,
More complex ones.
melodies her mother hummed while cooking breakfast, rhythms from her school's music class, harmonies that made the spaces between spaces resonate with joy instead of terror. In her dream, the entity learned and remembered, and promised to be more careful next time it tried to make friends with the small, fragile beings who sang such beautiful songs. When Mia woke the next morning, she wouldn't remember the dream clearly. She would remember the throne chamber and the scary thing and singing her song. But the details would blur, the way children's memories often do. But somewhere in her unconscious mind, a connection remained, a frequency match, a bridge between human consciousness and something vast and ancient and incomprehensible. She would grow up different from other humans, not visibly. But when she looked at the night sky, she would feel a warmth others didn't. When she studied dimensional physics in university, equations would make sense in ways her professors couldn't explain. When she eventually joined the Intergalactic Diplomatic Corps, she would have an uncanny ability to find common ground with even the most alien species. And sometimes, very rarely, when she sang to herself in quiet moments, the space around her would shimmer. Just slightly. Just enough that careful observers would notice reality responding to her voice the way a friend responds to their name. But that was years in the future. For now, she was just a 7-year-old who'd had a strange adventure and made an unusual friend and desperately needed pancakes and orange juice. Her mother made breakfast while Mia chattered about the big nice thing that had visited, about how it was scared and confused and just needed someone to help it find its way home, about how everyone should learn the star song because it helped when you were lost and alone. Her mother listened with the patient attention parents give to children's imaginative stories, not realizing every word was truth. Across the station, Vexra filed her first and only report. Dimensional breach resolved through diplomatic contact. No casualties. Recommend increased human-alien cultural exchange programs. Recommended mandatory music education for all security personnel. Recommend we never forget that the scariest moments can become the most beautiful if we choose connection over combat. Her superior officer would read that report 17 times before finally approving it with a note. Chief Vexra, are you feeling well? This doesn't sound like you. She would reply simply, I'm feeling human, sir. I recommend you try it. The station returned to normal operations. The dimensional breach became legend. Scientists studied. Philosophers debated, politicians argued about the implications. But in Throne Chamber 7, Talissandra kept one thing from that day, a recording. Not of the entity or the breach or the near apocalypse. Just a simple audio file of a human child singing about twinkling stars. She would play it sometimes, when the weight of ruling became too heavy, when decisions seemed impossible. When fear threatened to overwhelm wisdom, she would listen to that simple melody and remember that the universe, for all its terrors, was also full of wonder. That the most powerful force in existence wasn't weapons or armies or advanced technology. It was a child's song, offered with absolute faith that even the apocalypse deserved a chance to learn how to be gentle. And in the space between spaces, in dimensions humans hadn't discovered and possibly never would, an entity that had accidentally nearly destroyed an evacuation station learned a new way to exist. It had come seeking connection and found only terror. Until one small being had responded not with violence but with verse, not with weapons but with waves. The entity couldn't visit again. The risk was too great. But it remembered. It learned. And sometimes, when it felt the pull of loneliness, it would find the frequency of that simple human song and hum it in wavelengths that made quantum particles dance. It would remember the boop, the gentle contact, the absolute fearlessness of a creature so small it could fit in the entity's theoretical palm, the kindness that had seen past the terror to the loneliness underneath. And it would understand, in whatever way incomprehensible beings understand things, that it had made a friend. That somewhere in the vast, cold universe, a small human child had looked at the apocalypse and decided it needed a hug. Not literally. Even Mia wasn't that brave. But metaphorically. Spiritually. In all the ways that mattered. The entity had learned that destruction and communication weren't the same thing. That fear and hostility were different. That sometimes the universe just needed someone willing to sing first and ask questions later. It had learned to be careful. To be gentle. To remember that other beings were fragile. It had learned, in short, to be a better friend. And in the end, perhaps that was humanity's true gift to the galaxy. Not their weapons, or their ships, or their stubborn refusal to give up, but their capacity to teach even the apocalypse how to be kind, to show even the incomprehensible that connection was possible. to demonstrate that every being, no matter how vast or strange or terrifying, deserved a chance to learn a new song. Vexra stood watch that night, as she did every night, protecting the throne room that had witnessed the impossible. She thought about protocols and procedures, about all the rules she'd almost followed that would have prevented a miracle. She thought about a child in pajamas who had walked through 17 security checkpoints that should have been impenetrable, past systems designed to prevent exactly such intrusions, as if the universe itself had decided she needed to be exactly where she was. She thought about the entity's appendage pressed against the viewport, matching a small human hand, about the cosmic being that had learned to wave goodbye because a 7-year-old taught it how, and she made a promise to herself, standing in the darkness of Throne Chamber 7 under the light of 4 suns that had almost stopped existing. She would never forget. She would never stop telling this story. She would spend the rest of her life making sure that every being who served under her understood that the greatest weapon in the universe wasn't in any armory. It was in the heart of anyone brave enough to boop the apocalypse and teach it how to sing. The stars continued twinkling outside. Somewhere, a child dreamed of friendship with the impossible. Somewhere, an entity learned to be gentle. And somewhere in between, the universe remembered that sometimes the smallest voices carried the most important songs. Vexra settled into her watch, her weapon ready, but her heart finally at peace. The apocalypse had come. A human child had booped it, and the universe had learned to sing. Some stories didn't need complicated endings. Some truths were simple enough to fit in a nursery rhyme. Some miracles just needed someone willing to press their palm against the impossible and say hello. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe pressed back with something that might have been a thank you, might have been a promise, might have been the beginning of the most unlikely friendship ever forged. Vexra smiled, all 4 hands steady on her weapon, her heart's beating in rhythm with a song about twinkling stars. The watch continued. The universe persisted, and somewhere in the darkness, something vast and ancient hummed a simple human melody and remembered the day it learned that even apocalypses could make friends if they were willing to learn the words to someone else's song. The galaxy would never be quite the same, and that, Security Chief Vexra decided, was humanity's greatest gift of all.